Are you tired of losing queen endgames that are supposed to be drawn? In this video, I will go over key principles, concepts, ideas, and practical queen endgame positions that will help you win queen endgames in chess and stop you from blundering perpetual draws. Timestamps are in the description. Enjoy the video. So principle number one is going to be the fact that the quality of pawns matter much more than quantity. So in this position, as you can see, white only has 2 pawns while black has 5. Black is up 3 whole pawns. However, this pawn on a6 is a very, very advanced passed pawn. It's also an outside passed pawn, which always helps when you're trying to push it. But in this case, the position is completely winning because after a move like a7, black has to stop the pawn. He cannot push the pawns of his own. Otherwise, we would just queen. And after black stops the pawn with queen c8, we go queen to a2, let's say queen to a8, queen b1 check, king g8, and then queen b8. And this pawn was able to prevail despite the fact that black has 3 extra pawns. So make sure to prioritize quality over quantity. Principle number 2 is going to be king safety is very, very important. So we have a position like this where both sides have 7 pawns. Black has the doubled pawns here on the f file. However, these doubled pawns are actually very, very helpful when it comes to protecting this king because the pawn on f6 blocks the whole diagonal. It controls the e5 square. It also blocks the entire diagonal. So if white were to ever push and try a move like queen c3 or something, there would be nothing there just because this pawn covers the entire diagonal. And in positions like this, we can play a move like h4. After h4, what white should not do is take this pawn. It is an option because every move is going to be a draw here. It is a drawn position. However, after g takes h4, white is the one that is weakening his king. So after queen to g4 check, king to f1, we just simply take the pawn back. Our king is safer than the white king, and we are also slightly more active than white because white right now is defending everything, but it is a little bit passive, although it is holding for the white pieces. And if we go back here and instead of capturing here, queen to e4 or something different is played, anything besides capturing, what we can do is push the pawn to h3, push the king back, and then play this move f5. And even after queen e5 check, we can even play f6, which looks unnatural because we are weakening the king. However, it's actually white's king that is very weak. And after queen takes d4, we are threatening queen d1 checkmate. We're threatening queen a1 checkmate. This pawn on h3 is such a fantastic asset. And there's not much that white can do here because if white captures the pawn on b7, we can just simply run to h6. This is not a problem. We are still threatening these 2 moves. If I can make normal arrows, there we go. We're still threatening back rank checkmate, and there's not much that white can do here. Black is simply completely winning. Principle number 3 is going to be to push the passed pawns as far as possible. Earlier, we talked about how quality beats the quantity of pawns. The quality comes from the fact that the pawn is very, very advanced. The pawn that is closest to promotion is of the highest quality and presents the most danger in chess endgame scenarios. So in this position, the correct move is this move, pawn to d7. Now what happens here is that this queen is completely tied down here. It cannot move whatsoever. Therefore, now we go into principle number 4, and that is to not be afraid to activate your king and have your king out in the center of the board if the queen is restricted here. Because if this pawn wasn't here, then bringing out this king would be kind of pointless, but this pawn on d7 is tying down this queen. The queen cannot go to c7 and then like go over here to harass the king or even harass the pawns because of this one singular pawn that is restricting the enemy queen. If black tries something funny, we will give a check and then we will simply bring our king, and there's not much black can do. We can just freely activate our king, freely go after these pawns. As long as we don't blunder the pawn on d7, we can bring the king and we can try to promote this pawn right here. So after a move like a4, king to b4, b5, we can even go king d5 to win this pawn like this, and then we are completely winning. Next position that I want to show you is this one right here, and this is not much of a principle, it's more like a pattern. So in this position we have a passed A pawn, black has the passed C pawn, and black is also up one pawn. So in this position there's two things we want to accomplish successfully as the white pieces. We need to advance our pawn, and we also need to cover this diagonal right here so we don't get checked and somehow blunder a draw. So in a position like this, there is a move that accomplishes both of those things, or sets up both of those things, and that is this move, queen to b7. Queen b7 covers the entire diagonal, so there are no longer going to be any checks over here, and it also creates a red carpet. Let me just make red circles right here. It creates a red carpet for this pawn on a5, and soon it will be advanced to a6, a7, and a8, and especially it's going to come with a check, so it's even more dangerous for the black pieces. So next up we have this position right here. White is about to queen, so if this was white to move, this would be completely lost for the black pieces. However, it is black to move in this position, and thankfully this king on g2 is very, very weak. And what we need to do in a position like this is to try to get a perpetual draw. So we go queen to e4, diagonal check. Remember, you utilize diagonal checks because they're especially effective against the king. King to h3, queen g4, king to g2, and what we want to do is just simply keep giving checks. And after the king goes out to e1, what the white king will try to do here is to run over here to the a file, run up the board, and try to get closer to the queen and the pawn, maybe hide in the corner. But in a situation like this, we can just simply keep giving checks here, just like this. We can even pick up the pawn on f2, but we cannot exactly stop the king from advancing over here and getting to the queen and the pawn. However, we can actually use tactics to our advantage, such as the fact that if the queen blocks, we will win this pawn on a7, so the queen cannot exactly block on b5. It can block on c6, so be careful. So we have to give a check on a3 and not c6 here, and we need to keep giving checks. And once the king runs to the corner, we get into a scenario like this where the white king can no longer escape perpetual checks. So make sure, if you're the side that's worse and if you're about to lose, give as many checks as possible and work for a perpetual draw. So next up we have this pattern right here. The queen is on b3, the pawn is on b7, and the king is simply too far away from the passed pawn, so it cannot help out the queen over here. And in a position like this, we have a very easy pattern to win this, and that pattern is to first and foremost get close to the passed pawn, so a move like queen b6, and let's say our opponent plays king to g7. It doesn't matter what he plays, it's all winning. And in this position, we can either go queen a6 to go to a8, or queen c6 to go to c8. So in this case, we have both of those options. They're both winning. There might be some scenarios where only one option is winning. Let's say the king is on g8 and we have to go like queen c6 to give a check on c8. Something like that could happen. In this case, it doesn't matter though. After queen to c6, let's say the pawn is pushed, we go queen c8, and we're going to be promoting on the next move. So these are sort of some of the more common patterns that can occur, and this pattern also can occur quite frequently because we have to get close to the pawn in order to do this maneuver. If we go queen c4 to go queen c8, we lose the pawn. If we go queen a4 to go queen a8, we lose the pawn. So we have to first get close, and then black makes a random move, then we go queen c6, black makes another random move, and then we go queen c8, and the same thing can be done over here as well. Okay, now let's talk about an endgame like this. It's king and queen versus king and queen, but one side has an extra pawn. And in these types of positions, there are a couple of details you have to know in order to either draw them from the defending side or win them from the attacking side. So first and foremost, which pawn it is makes a huge difference. So in this case, it is the rook's pawn. The rook's pawn is actually one of the weaker pawns that you can have from the attacking side. In most endgames, the outside passed pawn is the most valuable pawn. However, this is sort of one of the few exceptions where the central passed pawns are actually going to be better in these queen endgames rather than outside passed pawns. And this is going to be easier to draw than, for example, this position right here where white has an outside passed pawn. And the second detail, as I'm sure you have already noticed, is how far advanced the pawns are. The further they are up the board, they are more dangerous to stop. So in this case, because the pawn is on a2, it has not been advanced. Even if it goes to a4, this position is a draw because it is not far enough and it does not create as many problems as, for example, in this position, this pawn that is about to promote. So pawns that are further back and that are further outside are less dangerous than the central pawns, especially bishop and king and queen pawns. And also how far advanced they are makes a huge difference. So the rook pawn that is not advanced could be a draw, while a queen pawn that is very advanced is winning for the side that has the extra pawn. Another very important detail that you have to consider when you're in endgames like this is where your queen is placed. So for example, in this position, the defending queen is on g5 and the attacking queen is on a6. So the fact that this queen is on a6 makes this position a draw because the queen is simply not centralized and the position is worse for white because of that reason. If the queen was in the center, this would be better. And that's why I actually turned the engine on for this segment, because I want you guys to see the evaluation and the fact that this position is a draw. But if I were to modify the position a little bit, right? Like for example, I go to this position right here, everything's exactly the same. It's still black to play, but instead of white queen being on a6, it is on e4. And the fact that this queen is centralized makes all the difference in the world, and the position goes from a draw to a win now for the white pieces, just solely based off the fact that queen has a better placement. So in endgames, centralized pieces are the most active, they control the most squares, and that is certainly the case in this position as well. So a centralized queen is always going to be better than the queen on the edge of the board. Now I want to talk about principle number 5, which is to position yourself to trade the queens if you want to promote your passed pawn and if you're in a position like this. So for example, if black plays queen to f6 here, this is a huge blunder. Why? Because the queen blocks. It also gives a check on g2. Therefore, in this position, a queen trade is forced, and now this pawn will simply go. And this is one of the main, not one of the main, sorry, this is the main mechanism by which white is going to try to win these endgames. It's always going to be about how white can trade the queens off so the extra pawn actually promotes. To expand the previous point, I want to show you this position right here. So in this position, after queen to f1, let's say white plays king to g3, and black blunders with this move queen to f6. This might look weird right now because of all the red circles. I will explain what that is in a moment. And in this position, as the white pieces, we have this move queen f2, trading the queens and going into a winning position. Now, for us to make it easier to trade the queens, what we need to do is be in this zone right here. Now, how do we determine this zone? So in this case, the black king is on a2. If the white king is either on the same file, same rank, or the adjacent file and rank, this makes it easier for white to actually trade the queens. So in this case, after queen to f6, if we look at all the red circles, the white king is on the rank that is next to the second rank. And when you're in situations like this, it makes it easier to trade the queens. It doesn't always work 100% of the time, but it is definitely something you should keep in mind. So if this king was here on h5, let's say, and the queen was on g4, the position is actually much easier to defend than if the king is on g3, because if the king is on g3, it's next to the second rank, so it's pretty much next to this king right here in terms of the ranks. They're one rank apart from each other. That makes it easier to trade the queens. queens. And this becomes very relevant when it comes to what is the best placement for the defending king, which I'm going to go into right now. Okay, now let's talk about good and bad king placements for the defending king, which in this case is black. So the best placement for the king is going to be directly in front of the pawn on the promotion square, as long as the queens are not traded off. Remember, do not trade the queens off as the black pieces and go into a losing king and pawn endgame, because if we trade the queens off, if the king is going to get the opposition. If it's a rook's pawn, you can trade the queens off because the king would be in the corner. That is a theoretical draw. Check out my king and pawns video for that if you want to. Now in this position though, the defensive technique is actually to go behind the enemy king and try to keep giving checks from behind. We will talk about that also a bit later on in the video with some other stuff. Right now, let's focus on the good placement of this king. So the best placement is on the promotion square in front of the pawn. If the white queen ever checks you, you want to be staying in this zone. You just want to be going back and forth pretty much. And if the pawn tries to advance, then you want to be giving checks to the king, not on d3, of course, maybe g3 or something like that. So the second best placement though is actually in the opposite corner of your opponent's pawn. So in this case, we have a pawn on a6 as the white pieces, and the best placement for the black king in this case is in the opposite corner of this promotion square right here. It doesn't have to be necessarily on h1, it can be somewhere in this zone right here, especially like these 9 squares. If your king is somewhere here, you're probably safe. The place you don't want to be though is, for example, on h6, that is on the same rank as the enemy's king. You do not want to be on the same rank. We talked about that a couple of minutes ago. Do not be on the same rank as the opponent's king. You want to be far, far away, preferably down here. There is another thing I want to mention about this position right here. The positioning of the king in the opposite corner of the pawn only works if your opponents have a rook or a knight's pawn. So in this case, it's a rook's pawn. If it was like a h rook's pawn, then the black king wants to be in this corner. So the opposite corner right here in this zone. So this only works though if it's a rook's or a knight's pawn. If it's a bishop or a queen pawn, it no longer works. So if I were to change the position a little bit, we are supposed to have the good king placement because we're in the opposite corner of this sort of promotion square, because the pawn is on the queen side, the king is in the opposite side here. But the thing is, this no longer works with the bishop pawn and the central pawns. It only works when it's a rook's or a knight's pawn. Another important detail that you have to remember is that if you're from the attacking side, you do not want to be putting the king in front of the pawn. So in this position, if you play this move king to h6, this actually blunders a draw, because after queen to h4 check, you're sort of forced in front of the pawn. If you block with the queen, it doesn't really matter. You're still going to be pretty much forced. Otherwise, it's just going to be a repetition. So the thing is, you do not want to be going to places where you're forced to block your own pawn. And after king g7, here black has an insane defensive resource, and that is king to a3. Remember earlier we talked about how you want to be in the opposite corner area of the promotion square. So in this case, our opponent has a knight's pawn, which is close to promotion, and we know that knight pawn is not so great. Our opponent would rather have either a bishop pawn or a central pawn. However, in this case, he has a knight's pawn, and because he has a knight's pawn, we can go into the opposite color corner, and this position ends up being a draw. Let's say king to f7 is played, we go queen c4, and we can just keep giving checks here and just harass the white king pretty much. No matter what white tries to do, we will simply keep giving checks, and there will be no way to make progress here as the white pieces. But going back though, if instead of this miraculous move, king a3, we play something that is much more natural, let's say queen to d8, idea to give a check on d7, just to continue keep giving checks and try to get a draw. After king to f7, the king will run up to the 8th rank, and then he has this option of blocking on e8. And this is the reason why the king also cannot remain on the a4 square, and this position ends up being a win for the white pieces. Okay, now let's talk about these positions and how you actually would draw them in practice or win them if they're winning. So in this position, it is black to move. How do we draw this? Well, we know that we need to keep giving checks, so let's do that. So we would go queen to b6, let's say queen to b4, and we give a check on e3. There are two things that really matter in this position. One of them is that the queens are not traded off, and the second one is that white does not make any progress. And the way we stop white from making progress is that we need to control the movement of this pawn, or we need to keep giving checks. So every move that we make has to do one of these two things. So let's say we give a check here, queen blocks. Let's say we give a check again. We would just repeat moves here. So eventually what will happen is that white queen cannot block, because then that would be a repetition and the king would have to move out of the way. We keep giving checks, the queen blocks, we keep giving checks just like this. Let's say the king goes down and we get into a situation where we can no longer give any checks. The reason we cannot give any checks, because if we were to give a check on d2, that will lose to queen b2 because the queens are swapped off the board. However, in a scenario like this, we don't need to give a check. The only thing we need to do is to control the movement of this pawn. So either you're giving checks to the white king constantly, or if you're unable to give any checks, then you need to control the square that is in front of the pawn, so you don't allow the pawn to advance. In this case, a move like queen c5 would do that very, very well, and that is how you draw this position. Okay, now let's talk about this position right here. This is winning for the white pieces because white has the bishop's pawn. And in this case, it is black to move. Black is going to give a check on b8. We block. Black is going to go back to give a check on g8. Now we block with the pawn. Our idea here is to advance the pawn forward and try to avoid any checks. Queen g3 is not possible because that would lead to an easy queen trade. So let's say white keeps the queens on the board with a move like queen to f7, still maintaining this pin right here, not allowing the pawn to advance forward. Now in positions like this, you have to work really, really hard, and I'm not going to explain every single move. I'm just sort of going to explain the ideas that are happening here. For example, this maneuver or these checks right here to go to the d file with a check and then end up on d5. The goal of this is to centralize the queen and put it on a very powerful square, because now after queen d5, b7 is controlled, f3 is controlled, so there's no checks, and you can safely walk the pawn up, and then you can safely walk the king up as well. However, with perfect defense, it's still a huge headache, and this is one of the most difficult things in chess to win. Even though it is winning theoretically, it's just a nightmare to win. It is just a huge nightmare. So I will skip forward here a little bit because there's not really much I can explain. It's really calculation heavy, and you need to find a lot of concrete ideas and concrete ways to stop the checks. There are no more ideas that will help you or guide you in the right direction. You just sort of have to calculate here, which is what makes these positions extremely tricky. But eventually, of course, white will be able to promote the pawn, and this will be winning. Now, if you put a lot of work into this endgame, it is going to be winning. But once again, it is still very, very difficult to win this position. And my advice would be, if you're on the defending side, don't give up, don't resign these positions, and try to work for a perpetual, because chances are, if your opponent is not at a very high level, he might not be able to figure out the way forward. Okay, now let's talk about this position right here. And what's funny about these positions is that winning them when the position is winning from the attacking side is actually significantly more difficult than defending them from the defending side. So in this case, defending this position with black is significantly more difficult than winning the last position with the white pieces, despite the fact that the last position was winning. And the thing is, here we have the best king placement. The only thing we have to watch out for here in this position are queen trades. We want to avoid them at any cost. And whenever we have this sort of a piece configuration, a very easy way to avoid queen trades and to stop your opponent from making progress is to go behind the king. This is a very, very nice and actually a relatively simple method of handling this position. If the king goes over here, I mean, you just keep giving checks. You just keep harassing the king. You just keep giving checks and then keep harassing the king. And there's just simply no way to make progress here. Whenever one side is trying to win, he has to worry about checks from the defending side. But when you're trying to defend these positions, you don't care if the white queen ever checks the black king, as long as the queens are not traded off. You just go back and forth with the black king, like you would just be able to go back and forth. But once you get to a scenario like this, the only thing you have to do is just simply keep giving checks, go behind the king whenever possible, and the position will simply be a draw, because there's no way to make any progress, and there's nothing that your opponents can do with the white pieces. Try to utilize diagonal checks as well. I'm going to repeat this one more time. I mentioned this earlier in the video. Diagonal checks are very effective because there are going to be some queen placements where the queen cannot actually stop or block the diagonal checks. There is one last tip that I want to give you guys, and that is to avoid getting checkmated as much as possible, because when you're in positions like this, let's say you're playing from the black side here, it is very easy to overlook certain resources, and you think you're just winning, but you could actually end up getting checkmated. For example, if you're careless and you push the pawn here to e2, you actually blunder checkmate in 3 moves. Queen to g1 check, king to d2, queen c1, king d3, and then queen to c3 is going to be checkmate. So you guys want to avoid scenarios like this as much as you can, and just never let your guard down. That's basically the point of this section right here. So that is all I wanted to talk about today. I hope you guys enjoyed this episode, and I will see you in the next one. Peace.